starts with your story. In fact, the future on our planet actually is rooted in our stories. That's how important stories are. So I'm going to just tell you a little story from my vacation that I took just before Labor Day. And we went up, my husband and I went up to the North Woods. We were way up in Aroostook County, not too many people around there. And there were a couple of things that really struck us there. One was a tree I saw. It was a yellow birch. It was the largest yellow birch I've seen in my life. It was probably maybe yay big in diameter. It was really old. The golden shiny bark that yellow birches usually have was gone. It was just this dark, kind of fissured old bark. Just incredible. And when you think about it, that tree had been there through several different rounds of logging in that area, and still there it stood. So this tree was just a huge inspiration to me. Another thing we saw is we were way, way beyond the lights of any town or city, of course, and so when we looked up at night, we were camping out, we saw the Milky Way, just this huge, sparkling arch across the sky. Just amazing. And the Milky Way is just one galaxy, our galaxy. And there are, actually, I looked it up, there are billions of stars just in our one galaxy. So again, pretty inspiring and a great story. And why stories are so important is because they root us. They root us in who we really are. They bring us energy. They keep us going when it gets tough, which, with climate change, things are pretty tough. It's easy to feel overwhelmed at the news we're getting. Your earth stories that connect you to the earth, that's what keeps us grounded. That's why they're really important. So that's the personal side of stories, but there's also another whole side, which is that stories, when they're used in advocacy, are what cuts through people's entrenched beliefs. And it kind of gets to what you, Doretta, said about, well, how do I speak to people who have either no interest in environmental issues or they're maybe denying some of the issues? Well, the way we do that is through heartfelt stories. That's how we connect, is through the heart level. And interestingly enough, so when you think about advocacy and you think about policymakers and decision makers, whether they're town council or state legislature or even Congress, all of those people that are serving in those positions are human beings, and they all have a heart. And the way you get to it is through authentic storytelling. And what's so interesting about that is that there are lots of highly paid lobbyists out there, of course, and we know that money is kind of running Washington these days. Well, individual heartfelt stories can cut through that. They have, and they can, and they do. So that's the power that citizens have. Well, one of the things that's happening right now is citizens are not exercising that power. We're not being heard, we're not stepping up. And so what happens when we don't step up is we get corporate policy, or we get policies that only benefit the 1%. Those citizen voices are extremely important to be heard. And if decision makers don't hear them, they won't know how you are impacted by public policy. So examples of things like, for example, down in South Portland, they have those oil tanks, and people live right next to them. And decision makers won't know if you have a child or a family member that's, has asthma or is affected by the fumes. They need to hear that, because otherwise they won't know. They won't know how policies are impacting you. So that's really, really important. So the other thing about stories is they touch the heart, they create the platform for dialogue and change to happen. So very, very, very important. So we have to communicate with decision makers, and unfortunately we have an imbalance of power, which you're all aware of. I could hear it in your comments, where citizen and people are sort of here, and then the powers that be are making all the decisions are here. And we need to bring this back into balance, and that's what environmental advocates are actually working to do, is to bring that citizen voice in. And the other thing about decision makers is, without the citizen voices, they actually can't stand up for an issue. I mean, we all wish that all of the decision makers at all levels, whether it's town or Congress or whatever, we want them to do the right thing, but they can't stick their neck out without your support behind them. They need to know that that support is behind them in order to do that. So that's why it's so important. That's why we need to step up. All right, so that's the importance of citizens in the political process. Let me ask a question. How many phone calls do you think it takes to influence, and I'm talking about state legislator here in Maine, how many phone calls or even a letter do you think it takes to move a decision maker here in Maine? 1? Other guesses? 5? And yet, one else want to guess?
50.
50. The answer is 5, actually. Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. You think that people are stepping up, but really it doesn't take that much. I've spoken with a lot of legislatures, and that's what they say to me. 5 notes or email maybe or a phone call is all it takes for them to get their attention. And then if you can bring them a solution, even better. That's actually a gift to them. Here's how we could solve this problem. We could do this. So that's how important your role is in working with decision makers. The other thing, since this is a group that wants to do things, it's important to say that you want to communicate with decision makers in a way that they actually get your message. So when the legislature is in session, they get bombarded with emails. You've probably seen these things, like everybody signed this letter and 100 emails go in on a certain issue. They're not going to open those. They're not going to see those, and they don't have staff, so they're not going to see them. So sometimes, it's much better to just type up a little note on a piece of paper and mail it, or even handwrite a little note. In fact, a story that I'll tell you, and this is on the Pine Tree Amendment. We're working on this in the last legislature, and we had some people in Waterville, some representatives who were not convinced that they should support us. In fact, one of them said, well, I haven't heard anything from constituents about this issue, so why should I even bother? So we heard that, hadn't heard from anyone, and I'd been teaching at Colby right at that time. So I immediately got in touch with some of my Colby students, and I said, we need your help. Can you talk to this representative about the Pine Tree Amendment? So one of my nice, good students there, she actually organized 3 or 4 of her friends. They hand wrote notes to the representative and saying, please support the Pine Tree Amendment. And then they took it downtown to Waterville and put it in the slot in his front door. Yeah, and believe me, he saw that, right? I mean, if they'd emailed him, which would be the easy way out, doesn't take any time, he probably wouldn't have gotten it. But they heard my message, and I said, you've got to get through to him. So they went down in person and stuck their notes in the slot of this door. And that's so simple, right? But huge impact, huge impact. Okay, so one of my favorite quotes is this one. It is, power is infinite. Power is infinite. This was said by a man named Eric Blue, who was an advisor to President Obama. And I love it because what he really means when he says that is that organizing creates power where none existed before. Organizing creates power where none existed before. And there's so many stories of where organizing made change. In fact, there was a little one that Andy just told about divesting the state pension fund from fossil fuels. That wouldn't have happened if a group of people hadn't organized and said, hey, wait a minute, this is important. And then there are other stories about really disempowered people organizing and demanding and getting what they want and need. And a great example of that is in Florida. This was some time ago. The tomato pickers, who were immigrants. They did not speak English. They were working in the hot sun. There was no toilets on the work site at all. The housing they lived in was company housing. It was way substandard. No benefits. So they finally had enough, and they organized. And they brought in, actually, communities of faith and other groups to help them. And they organized a boycott of Heinz tomato products, ketchup and so on. And anyway, long story short, they won. These people who were completely disempowered actually won. Now they have health benefits, they have restrooms, they have good housing. They're actually making a minimum wage or a decent salary. They're making way below minimum wage before. So it's just an example of how even people who don't know what they're doing and have very little power at all can create it and can succeed at it. So that's what's out there, is the power to organize. And honestly, with climate change and with environmental issues we're facing, that's the only way that we're going to win over corporate interests and people that have a money stake in continuing to burn fossil fuels. So organizing is power. And so there are also, I want to say that there are many, many ways to advocate. So I know that not everybody feels comfortable testifying before a legislative committee, but not everybody has to do that. So, you know, if you're an artist, as Annika is here, or if you're a videographer, as we have here, whatever it is you're doing, you can advocate within your livelihood, within what you're doing. In fact, I tell people, you know, if you're a landscaper, you can advise your clients to not use chemicals on your lawn. If you're a cook or a chef, you can use locally sourced or organic food and explain why that's important. Everyone can advocate. Advocacy is for everyone. And not only that, in order to solve the crisis that's in front of us, everyone has to advocate. You know? I mean, it's like, well, I liken it to the Second World War, which at that time, basically every person in this country was involved in the war effort in some way. Grandparents were sending Christmas cards to soldiers. Younger women were rolling bandages and creating first aid packages. Other women were taking jobs in the trades like welding and pipe fitting and carpentry that they never would have considered doing before. And of course, a lot of young men were serving in the military. So it took everyone in this country to win that war. Same thing with climate change. It takes all of us. It is going to take all of us. It's a similar situation. That's how serious it is. If we don't turn around what we're doing now, you know, like some of you said, there's not going to be much of a future for the younger generations coming up. So advocacy is for everyone, and everyone can find a way to do it. So I urge you to think about what in your life can you do to advocate for the environment. So let me talk a little bit about the Pine Tree Amendment, which you've already heard quite a bit about. But it is a constitutional amendment that would add the rights to clean air, clean water, and a healthy environment to our Constitution. And the interesting thing, of course, about that is we all feel like we have the rights to those things, but legally speaking, we really don't. And because we don't, then developers, corporations, they can do things without considering the environmental impacts as much as they should. So if we get this amendment passed and put in the Constitution, it will raise the whole level of environmental understanding, and how our policies are created will be much more balanced. It'll have people in mind. A couple of other really cool things about the Pine Tree Amendment is, like other civil rights, it applies to all people. So that means that it serves environmental justice. In other words, we can't have what they call sacrifice zones, where we build something and it's next to low income or ethnic minority neighborhoods. We won't be able to do that anymore, because everybody will have those rights, not just wealthier people or white people or any other group of people. It's a right for everybody. So it's a pretty cool thing. And let's see, there are 2 states that have environmental rights now, and those are Montana and Pennsylvania. And those states actually had them back in the 1970s. When we did all of the major environmental laws back in the 70s, they put those constitutional amendments in. So they've had them for quite a few years, 50 years. And now we're trying to catch up, and 14 states want to add those to their constitutions. But the nice thing about those 2 states having these rights is that they've been tried and tested. So we know, for example, that there aren't hundreds of lawsuits. We know, for example, that those things that rise to the level of a constitutional question can be resolved fairly. So it's really great to have that history to work from. And Michelle told you a little bit about Pennsylvania, where fracking was allowed everywhere. And then the citizens groups sued the state and were able to overturn the law and reinstate local zoning, which says you can't put fracking in neighborhoods or parks or churchyards or schools, right? So we do have that history, and it's really wonderful to be able to rely on that. And so we'll be talking more about how you can help us support the Pine Tree Amendment, because we need to pass it in the upcoming legislature. We need to pass it by 2/3 in the House and in the Senate, and that's hard. I think the Senate is a little bit easier, but the House is going to be tough, and we need everybody to contact the representative and say, you must support this. And just doing that alone is a really big contribution that you can make. So let me talk a little bit about my book, too. So I wrote this basically in response to all the bad news, right? We just get pummeled with bad news about the environment, and I'm not trying to minimize the seriousness of it at all. But on the other hand, there's a lot we can do about it. And I think if citizens kind of rise up and actually take action, we can turn these things around. We have a short time window to do this. Probably the next 5 or 6 years are critical. So I wrote the book for that reason, and also based on the experiences I had, because I thought, people are intimidated, I think, a lot by the word advocacy, and what does that mean? And it really is a lot more straightforward than you think. It's about citizens, as I said earlier, getting to the heart of decision makers and asking them to do what you want them to do. It's as simple as that. And we need citizen voices to be heard. So that's why I wrote the book. And in the book is a nice vision, which I'm going to share with you. And as I said, I wrote the book because of all the bad news, but also because I believe just passionately that we have to focus on the future we want in order to achieve that future. Right? We have to focus on the future we want. Think about that for a second. I mean, energetically speaking, if we're always focused on the problem, are we going to solve it? I don't think so. Unfortunately, though, the way our culture is organized right now, it's all about problems. And I think a lot because of the media, because that sells advertising, it sells their business. They focus on problem, 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 and don't mention very much at all about the good things that are going on. There's a lot of good things going on. In fact, Andy was talking about the youth. And it's fantastic what our young leaders are doing on the environment. In fact, they were the ones in 2018 who finally asked the moral question. The moral question was, is it right to leave this warming Earth to future generations to solve? And kind of in a social science sense, change never happens until you actually ask a moral question. And so I was really excited in 2018. This is when Greta Thunberg first came out, and there were other young leaders at the same time who were asking this question: is it right to leave this to us? And I thought, finally, this is really good. We have to challenge the status quo in order to make social change happen. So they finally did that. So anyway, I wrote the book because we need to focus on the solutions in order to achieve them. And the solutions and the reason behind that is this vision. All life on Earth is respected, revered, and nurtured. I'll say that again. All life on Earth is respected, revered, and nurtured. So what does that mean? Well, here's what I think it means. No race, class, gender, or any group of people is judged to be better or worse than any other. All people have access to fresh water, nutritious food, and safe housing. The Earth's natural ecosystems are thriving. Farming, forestry, and fishing both harvest and replenish the Earth's bounty. Every child has a healthy, loving, and safe home. All people have access to affordable, high-quality health care. All people have an opportunity to learn in a wide variety of high-quality educational settings. All people have an opportunity to succeed in expressing their unique gifts in the world. Every woman can choose the number of children she has. Governments set reasonable rules based on what the majority wants, and enforcement of those rules emphasize helping violators to find a better path rather than punishing them. The world economy serves people equitably, is based on providing goods and services people need, and is not dominated by fear, lack, or greed. The world's unique peoples and cultures respect each other's differences and live in peace.